Hi, I'm Rachel Rock Blake, and we're at the top of the hour, so welcome everybody. We have a great webinar for you today and great group of presenters. Just a few housekeeping notes to start off with. We are recording today's webinar. We'll be sending a follow-up email to all of you with a link to the recording and slides. You can also download a copy of today's slides by clicking on the PDF in the related content window. If there is time at the end, we will have a short question and answer period. Using the Q&A function located on your toolbar. Please feel free to type in your questions at any time during today's webinar, and we'll get to them at the end. Today's webinar we'll be talking about consumers and consumer preferences and their perceptions on food pricing. We'll also have a section at the end where we'll be looking at some trending produce and floral categories. Our team of presenters today includes myself, Manager of Global Insights at International Fresh Produce Association, Jonna Parker, VP of Circana Fresh Foods Group, and Carlos Salazar, Senior Analyst, Circana Fresh Foods Group. This is part of a new IFPA and Circana webinar series that we launched back in December. And we're really excited that you're here today with us. Just want to put on your radar that we're going to be having 3 more webinars this year quarterly on May 29th, August 28th, and December 11th. So keep those on your radar, and I hope you'll join us back here again. I also wanted to let you know that we do have the International Fresh Produce Association is hosting an upcoming conference. The retail conference will be held in Dallas from April 30th to May 1st. So we hope to see you there as well. And I'm going to hand it over to you now, Jonna.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And just a plug, I will be at the retail conference. It's one of my favorite events of the year for the produce industry. I was just at the Floral conference last week in Miami. What I love about the retail conference is in addition to presentations, there's also some great breakout and work sessions as well. So today, as Rachel alluded to, we are going to be discussing a bit of a landscape around consumer context and what it means for the produce and floral industry. We'll also hit some key highlights as we've started out 2025 on how these two departments are faring. But the real star of the show today is going to be my colleague, Carlos. As many of you know, we have live real-time data available in both the produce and floral industry for IFPA members. And rather than give you a bunch of boring slides, Carlos is going to be taking through a real-time analytic looking at that data. And just to give you a preview, we're going to be covering both value add as well as traditional produce in that section. We're also going to be talking about organic. And then we'll be taking a deep dive into 3 areas of the produce and floral industry that have really come on strong in the first part of this year. As always, please put questions in the chat box. We will have time at the end, and also you'll find that us presenters do answer them as we go along. So this was just a quick reminder. These are live links. They'll also be in the PDF. What is on the website from Circana and IFPA is a wealth of information. Not only is there point of sale data like we covered today, but a lot of what I talk about related to consumer behavior and reactions to different price conditions or market conditions, you can also decompose using some of our shopper behavior analytics there. So let's set the stage and talk about today's consumer and what it means for the produce and floral industry. First of all, we came off of an all-time sales high in retail food and beverage in 2024. However, what was interesting as we hit our now 4th year post-COVID is the continued solution-orientedness of the consumer, meaning maybe 5-10 years ago, or certainly in different generations and times we've been humans on this planet, we've been more methodical about this is what I buy from a grocery store and this is what I buy when I go out to eat at food service. Increasingly, it is important to remember that today's consumer is solving needs and it's often occasions and mindset that's driving their decisions. That is absolutely true, as we'll cover today. I firmly believe when we talk about fruits, vegetables, and flowers. You know, we could talk at length about the importance of convenience or health or just the experience someone might have with cooking an artichoke as part of that context. But it is important, especially because we're going to talk a lot today about how the landscape has shifted and the role of price in decision, which is the top headline I'm sure all of us are talking about and thinking about at our corporations. But ultimately, at the end of the day, everything's in context. So before I go into the detail, I do want you to know that the biggest change that we are seeing when it relates to retail is how we're shopping and where we're shopping. And I'll cover that specifically today for fresh produce, as well as a bit on floral. But ultimately, there is so much more competition for our shoppers' dollars than just someone making a decision when they go to the set for, let's say, wet rack vegetables. And which retailer we go to is often much bigger than why their produce or floral is part of that foot traffic. So I'm going to jump right in to some of the consumer context. And quick note, this summary slide is part of our FMI and Circana Top Trends in Fresh series. So if you'd like to know more about the broader landscape facing fresh, I invite you to click through this and visit that webinar we did a few weeks back. Throughout every month, we do in-depth primary shopper surveys. One of the most important landscape context set that we have in Q1 of 2025 is remembering that the consumer is continuing to feel price pressure. And as we'll talk about in a minute, in addition to the inflationary pressures that we had seen pretty much since 2022 driving consumer behavior, we now have additional news and headlines coloring their choices at the shelf set. But as we started this quarter and this year, 84% of American consumers across all income levels, demographics, and generations felt that the price they were paying for goods at shelf was higher than they expected to pay. Now, produce actually and floral have not seen nearly as much price increase as other foods that we'll cover in a minute. But when nearly 85% of Americans feel the price they're paying for anything is too high, you can only imagine that the reality that they're paying is very different than what they feel. Furthermore, we find especially our youngest consumers in the market today are very concerned, extremely concerned. For those of you survey nerds out there, that's a 5-box choice and they ticked the highest box. We especially see our youngest consumers who are just now setting their purchase patterns be extremely concerned about the price of goods. One of the things we've noticed over time here at Circana as statisticians is it typically takes about 3 years for a consumer to feel that the price they're paying today is the price. 3 years is the full life cycle of what they used to pay and what they pay today. Now, that's a generalistic statement, but remember that in the last 3 years, so going back to 2022, in almost every commodity, including fruits, vegetables, and flowers, we have seen prices go up and down to unprecedented rates. So this 3-year cycle keeps resetting of the price someone expects to pay, and we're still in the thick of it right now. All of this concern has led to a reduction in consumer sentiment. So this is the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, tracked over time since the beginning of 2023. And you see that in the early part of 2024, we'd actually seen a relative peak that has since eroded as we've started this year and this quarter. Ultimately, whether we're looking at this macro look of consumer sentiment or honestly the deep dive work we're doing in specific categories like fruits, vegetables, and flowers, consumers are not optimistic and feeling this price pressure, whether it's real or not. But what's really interesting about talking today to all of us in the produce and floral community is in the grand spectrum of foods, well beyond food, that consumers spend money on, all of the industries that Circana tracks, which are truly all the industries that consumers spend money on in terms of goods and services, or I should say in goods, fresh food and floral had a really strong year in light of all of this context. So when we took every single consumer industry and stacked them up end over end in both dollars and units sold across all spectrums of retail last year, we found that fresh food and floral ranked fourth overall of all consumer goods in terms of growth in dollars. But in addition, only pet care exceeded the unit growth that was delivered by fresh foods and floral. And why I wanted to highlight this specifically in the context of our discussion today is it was produce and floral that especially drove this unit growth. So, in light of everything that a consumer could choose to spend money on in a retail landscape, everything from sports equipment to beauty, produce and floral were chosen more so in 2024 than ever. So I always like starting a lot of headwind and negative discussion with a reminder that when a consumer prioritizes a good or service, they will spend money and consider it necessity. But do remember that they're making many more choices than just what we're selling them in our departments. So speaking of headwinds, I'd be remiss on March 6th of 2025 to not talk about the consumer's perception of tariff. So I want to, as you know from Circana likely, we are tracking again primary shopper sentiment on key things throughout the year. And we recently did a survey of 11,000 primary grocery shoppers in the household. And ultimately, no big surprise to anyone, it was a histogram in terms of support for tariffs. We saw more support than opposition, but the majority of consumers were neutral. What was interesting, though, was the expectation of how it would impact the price of goods and services. So the chart on the right was for the question of how do you think creating tariffs will affect the price you pay at retail? And no big surprise, I thought what was really interesting is especially those who oppose tariffs as well as those who support tariffs both thought it would affect the price they pay at retail. Now, Rachel, I know that the IFPA has been doing a lot of work in the tariff space just so far this month and this year. Can you share for the group a little bit of some of what IFPA is seeing related to tariffs and its role in fruits, vegetables, and floral?
Absolutely. So what we've been looking at is, really what's the context for these tariffs, right? We're talking about primarily Canada and Mexico in terms of countries that import produce to the U.S. China's a little bit lower on that importer list, but you know, of the 44.5 million tons of produce that are available for U.S. consumers in a given year, 25% of that volume comes from Mexico, and so the scale of that is just immense, right? We imported last year over $19 billion worth of produce from Mexico, and almost $3 billion from Canada. And top commodities coming in from Mexico include avocados, of course, strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, lemons, tomatoes, and peppers. Coming from Canada, you know, 100%, pretty much 100% of the potatoes that we import come from Canada. We also get a lot of, you know, cucumbers, peppers, and tomatoes that are grown undercover. We're getting those from Canada, as well as a huge amount of mushrooms. So the scale of what's at stake here under these tariffs is a good portion of the United States food supply.
As I always say, when we do things like this in the broad spectrum, fresh is the first place that consumers often see or feel any kind of price change, just because the life cycle from field to shelf is so short. Whereas other industries that are being subject to the tariffs might have some on hand supply before the tariff time to sell through at a different price. As you all know, in fresh, it is ultimately us that are the first line of defense of what a consumer sees and feels. So speaking of price changes and their impact on consumers, there's another headlining conversation that has been dominating the media so far this year. Yes, fresh eggs price at retail in the most recent period is 109% higher than the same period in 2019. The year-over-year price change for eggs, by the way, you'll see in a minute. But eggs are just one of a variety of everyday foods and beverages that consumers now feel and in actuality are experiencing much higher price points than they did pre-pandemic. And we specifically chose these like sugar, non-chocolate candy, and carbonated soft drinks because they are some of the most ubiquitous, i.e. widely purchased, and most frequently purchased categories. Now, this graphic, which you've likely seen from Circana before, if you stacked each of those purple vertical bars end on end, that is the total average accumulated since the beginning of 2020 price increase across food and beverage at retail. Now, it ends up being about 31% higher in price on average than 2019. However, certain categories like sports drinks are seeing a 55% increase. Now, when we stack up our fresh produce department, we only see during the same period, if we were to chart out fresh produce in those purple bars, we would only be at a 17% average price increase since 2019. Floral is seeing a 40% price increase. But as I discussed last week at the Floral event in Miami, what's interesting about Floral is certain prices at certain price tiers have seen this 40%, but both the produce and especially the floral industry have responded to this broader consumer inflationary period with different assortment options at different price points. So the headline to take away here is yes, several categories are hitting the consumers' wallets in a much more deeply impact than before that are not in fresh produce. But when we offer multiple price points and multiple options for people, we still get engagement in the produce and floral departments. So eggs are a headline. Let's talk about what's happened to eggs, because one of the analytics we're working through at Circana isn't just the price of eggs going up, but is actually what happens to both the consumer behavior of eggs as well as associated categories. I'm using this in all of my thought leadership conversations because eggs are one of the most widely and frequently purchased products that consumers in America buy. And certainly there's been an exceptional start to 2025. That's a picture which many of you probably saw when you went shopping or ordered your groceries online, which was a call out by retailers at shelf that while they had egg supply that day, due to the supply constraint with the avian influenza epidemic, they may not have supply tomorrow. What was interesting about the month of January and February, when those shelf signs went up, which is the tail end of this line graph here, the weeks ending January, kind of the middle of January, you see how that pink line, which is the dollar sales of eggs, were up 70 some odd percent more than even just the prior year. And if you look on the left, the prior year of that same period in 2024 really was already 60% higher. So dollar sales of eggs driven by large unprecedented price points were really driving high dollar sales. Here's the part that statisticians don't often think would happen. During those weeks of January, when those signs like the one I picture were up at shelf, we saw more units of eggs moved. So even though the price was much higher, people were likely concerned about shortages, and eggs were still a vital part of their at-home meal consumption. So even though the price was higher, units were actually up. Now, our most recent week that we just got data for last Monday, which is the week ending 2/23, that started to show a unit flatness and the price has started to come down. However, why I wanted to show this slide on a produce and floral conversation today is one of the most important things we're learning in light of now 2 years where the month of January saw unprecedented egg prices is people often kept buying eggs, but it impacted not just things that they were connected to, but the amount of money they were willing to spend on other foods, including fruits, vegetables, and flowers. That's actually an analytic we're strongly encouraging all of our supplier community to look at. When the price of one ubiquitous and widely purchased product goes up, it absolutely does have a material impact, both consciously and in material data that then has a halo effect on other foods. Berries, for example, has about 50% of their meal occasions sourced at the morning mealtime. So a great analysis to follow up in the supplier community would be when the price of breakfast foods like eggs go up, what happens to berries? I'm going to shift gears a little bit with one more important headwind to cover. One of the other things, as we're now in year 3 of inflationary prices at food retail, one of the other things we've seen at Circana is a slowdown, especially in our lowest income bracket. So when we talk about our lowest income consumer households, we're talking about those who make 70,000 less per year. And then obviously we add a little bit depending on the size of the household, right? So if you have 6 people in your household, 70, we then add 5,000 per household member and what the annual income is. But the reality is overall, 2022 and 2023, lower income consumers were still spending at a year-on-year higher clip. But in 24, we saw a slowdown in the amount, especially out of home, that those consumers were willing to spend. Now, there is still growth with this group, this lowest income group, in terms of spending, but their slowdown is a sign that we can't just keep raising prices and expect volumes to continue. And just to give you some dimensional input, how important is the lowest income bracket within our consumer populace here in America? Well, they make up $16 billion of food and beverage spending annually. And just that group alone in fresh produce is over $200 billion. In fact, evenly for both total food and beverage as well as fresh produce, low-income households represent 35% of all spending. So not are they only just a signpost of overall consumer behavior, but a slowdown in consumer spending in this group will absolutely affect the total for fruits and vegetables, just as it does total food and beverage. And I do firmly believe that understanding this income group, while they don't over-index for produce, is a vital and important part of how we're going to go to market in the future. On the flip side, another group that is important to think about when we think about targeting fresh fruits and vegetables is consumers who prioritize health and wellness goals. So no big surprise, in our survey work in the first quarter of this year, we found tremendous support among consumers who are prioritizing basically physical fitness and food and beverage choices. For example, we saw 68% of all primary shoppers saying that they were making new and additional health and diet goals in 2025. We also saw that food and beverage choice was the #1 way they wanted to contribute to their overall health and wellness. I also highlighted managing stress levels because, as I shared with the Floral community last week, wherever folks have a mental health need, a product like fresh flowers can be a low-cost way, when marketed right, to create a solution. Now, similarly, when we aggregate up the spending power of the healthiest consumers, i.e. the consumers we're talking about who prioritize health and wellness goals in their overall decisions, we're talking about a third as well of overall spend. Now, this is not a different group. Someone could be a low-income household and also prioritizing health and wellness, but overall, this is an incredibly powerful group. One, just because someone says they're making smarter food and beverage choices and prioritizing physical and mental wellness does not directly mean they're spending more on fruits, vegetables, and flowers. That's actually a huge opportunity that I know we'll be digging into in these quarterly webinars, because just because someone says, hey, I really want to eat better, does not historically correlate into more produce spending. There's so much competition and marketing dollars being spent to try to market to this group across food and beverage. We cannot just assume that someone prioritizing health and wellness means they're going to spend more in produce. In fact, we've often found that other well-marketed things like functional beverages, things like protein bars, and other snacks that are really aiming and targeting this group and aggressively marketing to them both in-store and beyond often win before fruits and vegetables. And that brings up a really important point. One of the things that we have to keep a monitoring pulse on is not just the dollars and volume of fruits and vegetables, but also the consumption patterns. So that is another metric that we can use here at Circana. And there was good news in the consumption, which we measure as annual eatings per capita or per person in America. We saw fruit in the pink bar here, fruit increase average eatings annually by Americans by 8 eatings since 2021. However, in that same time period, vegetable eatings declined from 156 in 2021 to only 129 vegetable eating occasions in per capita in 2024. Ultimately, it's important to understand that occasions drive growth. Occasions drive sales. And if we are not making it onto the plate, not just onto the shelf, but truly onto the plate, that is where sales will follow. So let's talk about sales now, breaking down into retail versus food service. So ultimately, across the nation, total food and beverage is $1.7 trillion, which is up about 3% in 2024 versus the prior year. Retail is about 60% of that dollar sales. And when we break that into eating occasions, we're seeing about 86% of food occasions are sourced from retail for the in-home occasion. Now, that is an important point because we get asked all the time since COVID, have these ratios changed? Well, we've actually seen throughout 2024 and each quarter as we monitor this, the ratio of both dollars and eating occasions, while it's materially different than it was pre-COVID, the rate of dollars and eating occasions between retail and food service have remained relatively consistent over time. So it's not necessarily a trading of dollars between the two or occasions between the two. It's been relatively consistent. What has changed, though, in the retail spectrum is the way we shop. We are in a quick trip economy now. There are more places to get foods and beverages than ever before, and that includes fresh produce and floral. Quick trips, we make about 109 trips per year. And compared to what we were doing during the pandemic era of 2021, that is 13% more trips that qualify as a quick trip, which the quick definition of that is fewer items and typically only one or two departments visited when you're in the retail store. So not only have we seen a shift towards more quick trips, although trip types overall, we are making more trips than ever, the other really interesting trend is the channel changes. So grocery as a channel, that's supermarkets, both traditional and specialty, have seen a steady decline of all four trip types since 2021. Specifically, the sharpest decline has been seen in the largest pantry stocking trips, that a lot of those pantry stocking trips are shifting to club and to super centers like Walmart. As I mentioned earlier, and you added up on the prior chart, we hit an all-time high in the average per household retail trip for food and beverage in 2024. 219 trips were made by the average US household. That's 19 more trips just in 1 year. Fresh foods overall went up as well, but one of the best stories to talk to you about today is how fresh fruit more frequent trips really was a huge part of Fresh's overall trip frequency gain. Now, also, we saw trip frequency growth in the fresh meat space, particularly in ground beef and in chicken. We also saw deli prepared foods and specialty cheese also increase trips year over year. Overarchingly now, as I've proudly shared on each quarter, produce is the most frequent fresh department, excluding dairy. Fresh produce is seeing 7 more trips annually than we did just a few years ago. Floral also is seeing trip increases, and we're specifically seeing an additional number of buyers purchase roses and arrangements than they ever have before. But frequency isn't reaching every channel evenly. This is breaking down produce sales by channel, both over year, as well as our most recent 4-week time period in February, the latest 13 weeks in the beginning of this year, and the culmination of year-to-date 2025. Lots of bars here. But as you can tell, that purple, which is traditional supermarkets or traditional food channel, is seeing a steady erosion that has continued to increase as 2025 has dawned. Now, as I've talked about before, what we're seeing in the beginning of 2025 mirrors what we've seen in the past. As I stated, there was growth both in the club sector as well as in the mass supercenter sector in produce specifically. All of the numbers here are for fresh produce specifically. But we've also seen growth in food value for the first time since 2021 at now 10.7% of total produce sales. Food value would be limited assortment retailers who market exclusively on price. Think about places like Aldi, Food for Less, Grocery Outlet, Smart and Final. In addition, one of the trends that's hit produce less so than other fresh departments is a continued importance of the channel of internet. So online is now 3.7% of total produce dollars across channels, but produce is actually, just like in store, some of the most frequently purchased products when someone does grocery. Now, this internet would only include a pure play online grocer. It would not include a click and collect or delivery from a grocer. When we add this all up and talk about fair share contribute to growth, while food traditional, i.e. traditional supermarkets, are still 47% of total sales, as you saw, we are actually seeing them punch well below their weight in that channel in terms of growth to overall sales of produce. What's contributing much more growth right now and is over indexing in fair share of actual sales to growth sales is mass, club, and online. So let's flip the switch and again look across retail, comparing produce and floral to other food departments. That first row there is total edible. That's all food and beverages, i.e. the sum of all of the departments listed. In our first two columns, we have dollars and then volume or unit. In produce, we use volume or pounds as our equivalizing factor. In floral, we do use units or bunches. Price per volume or unit, again, is relative to that metric, and then we do the change on the far right. Produce through February, 52 weeks ending February, is really seeing flat price. Dollars are up 3.9%. Volume is up 3.6%. Produce remains one of the most value-driven departments that is in the store. Now, that beverages number of 22 cents is per volume, so keep in mind that's not the price of a can or a bottle. Produce is value. Produce is cheaper than other departments on average when someone buys something there, and we're seeing tremendous growth. Floral is seeing strong dollars, relatively flat volume as this new year dawns. Now let's flip the script and look at the consumer drivers of sales. In the first bar, you have, again, all of those rankings. Now, floral, we only capture behavior in grocery today, so unfortunately I can't put floral on this chart, but I will tell you when it comes to produce, we are seeing 99% of Americans purchase something from the produce department in the last year. That's flat, right? I mean, penetration is something that doesn't usually change at the department level. What has changed is the dollar growth that we were seeing in total is working out to be a similar rate of dollar growth per buyer or per US household. We're also seeing that frequency gain in produce. Again, that point I said earlier, 85 average trips per store and a 3% frequency increase there in orange is really what's driving our sales. Now, unit sales per trip is a metric we don't talk enough about in the fruits and vegetables industry. The average consumer, when they go to the produce department, is buying 3 different categories. But think about how many commodities and offerings we have. To only see 3 is really a potential opportunity. Let's dive into the category level, and then I'll do a quick deep dive on fruits, vegetables, and floral before I turn it over to Carlos to do our live demonstration. When we rank for this current 52-week period in February, you see that produce has many entrants in terms of the most dollar additive categories across total fresh food. Fresh berries, again, has topped the top 5, adding another nearly $700 million in additional dollars with a remarkable 10% unit increase. Berries have been growing the 20 years plus that I've been working in food and beverage and continue to top the list. Avocados had a wonderful year. Rachel just mentioned the import and exports. We'll be watching avocados closely, but I do want to talk about avocados and grapes for 1 second. Both were surprise growth drivers for many retailers because not every retailer enjoyed increased avocado or grape sales. Furthermore, the industries themselves, the growers shippers who produce those commodities, were surprised at how strong those commodities were growing. As we have Carlos look specifically, he's going to dive into onions. That is another example of a category we often forget about having complexity. Consumers are eating at home more than ever. They're snacking more than ever. Even if you have a tough crop year, we're seeing evidence that retail can still grow, as evidenced by these 3 commodities. So we'll take a minute to talk about fruit. This is actually a chart that we can automate and choose what threshold we want to include when we do the stacked bar chart. So what we've chosen for here is looking at the various subcategories within fruit, the 52 weeks ending 2/23. And we have set a threshold of 90% of sales of fruit. And these are the fruits that that qualify. Now, in all other is every other type of fresh fruit out there, so it's a lot. But ultimately, it's these categories, especially in a volume or pounds perspective, that are really contributing up to 90% of all pounds. You also see that each of these commodities, led by berries as the largest, have had differing trends when it comes to dollars in blue or pounds in orange. We've seen categories like apples actually decrease dollars but deliver an increase of pounds. Grapes is an example where we saw both metrics go up, which was driven by demand. Melons actually went down, but overarchingly year over year, we're not seeing large swings. But there is a mix within the top most dollar contributing categories in fruit. Some are growing and some are declining. The goal is to increase overall fruit sales and not necessarily fight or change each other. One of the most interesting things that we've gotten to do so far this year is get asked about some really strong initial out of the gate sales. One of them, as Carlos will talk about in a minute, is mangoes. Now, January was an amazing month for mangoes, and actually 2024 had been a relatively low sales compared to prior years. We heard of and saw evidence of many retailers tying mangoes into a Lunar New Year, which created excitement and interest and differentiation by the retailers who did that kind of display. Furthermore, it wouldn't be a conversation about produce if we didn't talk about the amazing growth of Decopon tangerines, also known as Sumo citrus. We're seeing incredible triple-digit growth driven by an increase of first-time tangerine buyers. 80% more consumers have bought tangerines who did not buy tangerines 2 years ago. And we've also seen some really creative merchandising and out-of-store demand-driving promotions that are helping bring consumers not just into stores and not just into citrus, but specifically into this brand and this variety. As we saw in the beginning of the century, when you market produce that has many strong consumer attributes, people respond with their dollars and their feet. Let's talk about vegetables. It takes a lot more categories to get to 90% of vegetable sales, but there's also 20% of volume in dollars that are still not even showing up here. Lots of vegetable choices at retail with a lot of growth pockets. Potatoes did see a dollar decrease, but a lot of that is due, as Carlos will talk about, we saw a lot of pound moving because of the value of fresh potatoes and their ubiquity. Also, one last point before I turn it over to Carlos to go deep into the data around the floral department. For anyone who was not in attendance at the IFPA Floral Conference last week, I did a deep dive about opportunities in this space, but it is all around making the everyday incredible. So roses, as well as bouquets, not only drove dollar sales, but actually drove units. And as I highlighted last week to that audience, a lot of it was in making multiple price points in really creative displays that literally interrupted and drove demand. So with that, Carlos, I am going to pull up this slide and let you turn it over to screen share. We are going to get in real time live data that is available to every IFPA member, thanks to Carlos Salazar demonstrating for us.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jonna. So hi, everybody. My name is Carlos Salazar. I'm a senior analyst here at Circana for the Fresh Foods Group. Yes, I do have 4 screens and a ton of tabs open for all this. And yes, I do have a little bit of a flu voice, so please bear with me. So today I want to empower you with data through that exclusive IFPA client portal. So no worries, you can find the access link for this content in the deck. It's slide 6 for you sticklers. So this portal unleashes the power of our latest and greatest Milo Plus, which is the largest census-based POS coverage of CPG core channels. This portal includes prepackaged UPC products as well as PLU random weight items. And the data updates every 4 weeks. And we do have a schedule for you guys on this landing page to the left of it. And when it's refreshed, you can access 28 commodities in the fresh fruit aisle, as well as 88 different commodities for the fresh vegetables. So there are 15 different reports you can view. There's 10 for produce, and then there's 5 for floral, which are completely free as an IFPA member with your website login. So this set of reports give you, let's say, a 30,000 feet level top line perspective that basically seeks to empower the industry and enable that fact-based decision making through this data. So what I'm going to show you next is just a tiny fraction of all the information that is available to us. My mission today is to give you some confidence in going through some of these reports so you can elevate your insights into that next level. So we start first with a report that gives us a quick last 4-week performance. And it has 3 main metrics in POS. So it has dollar sales, volumes, which is in pounds, of course, and then price. Depending on the item, we do have price per volume, price per unit, and it provides that perspective about the produce department, as well as that breakout between fresh fruits and the vegetable aisles. So this basically provides that general state of fresh market and how it's trending. For example, we know we've seen avocados, melons, apples increase their prices due to reductions in local production, supply issues, the now very famous tariffs, adverse weather, rising energy cost, rising labor costs, right? So all these things have a place to explain that pricing. But on the other hand, we have things like potatoes and onions, which are strong and flexible, and they're very good cooking staples. And we have seen their prices dip a little bit because we're seeing retailers use these to increase that in-store food traffic. After that, we also have trended conventional and organic share. So we define organic as something that is grown and processed without any synthetic chemicals. So this provides an annual sales view of the demand for organic produce. We know organic produce has been increasingly steady in the US. So we have seen this in berries, we have seen this in bananas, packaged salads. So sales have been increasing, especially as those younger generations are becoming more involved with produce. Their consumer footprint in fresh is increasing, and these valuable things like sustainability, transparency, health, nutrition for these highly educated consumers become more prevalent. So, of course, because we like to keep things dynamic, you can use the filter in the top left to select any of the 116 commodities available as part of Circana's standard hierarchy. So, for example, if we look at the example of onions, we see that this share has remained relatively flat. However, if we move to something more like, let's do something fun. Let's do spinach, for example. I'm going to give it a couple seconds to load. Beautiful. So we see this is much more relevant. We also have a very similar look, but it goes into, rather than organic, it goes to value add. And when we talk about value added produce, we refer to those commodities whose value has been increased through the addition of a process. A process being, cutting, coring, peeling, slicing, just to name some examples. So value added items have grown due to that consumer demand for convenience and, time-saving options that Jana was referring to before. So we have all that convenience, but we also maintain that freshness and that nutrition in mind. So we've seen products like broccoli, lettuce, garlic see tremendous growth in value added since COVID. And we can also use our filter here, kind of like the example. I had it set to fresh onions, but if we do it to, let's do fresh lettuce, for example, which I know there's a big in cutting and washing, we can see how that's been growing exponentially since COVID too. Next, we have one of my favorite reports, which is the top 10 commodity subcategory. This report is dynamic. It's very dynamic because unlike the 3 reports I just showed you, it has a very diverse set of filters. So it kind of allows you to play with the product selection. And it also has that added layer of organic claims or value-added processes as well. So this allows you to see, for example, if we look at the 52-week period, fresh onions are the 4th largest growing sale commodity in fresh vegetables. But if we go to the right and we look at the absolute change, we see that's where most of the growth in the latest 52 is coming from. But let's say we wanted to see if this is accelerating or decelerating. So we can play with all these filters. Like I said, we have all the different aisles, all the different commodities you can play with. You have the value added, not value added filters. But I'm going to change this into the latest 4-week period, just so we can see how the ranking moves. So as we give it a second, we see that onions now becomes the third one. So it seems like it's accelerating. This is great because it can give you a sense of seasonality. If there's some sort of situation that's happening currently that's either uh, favoring or, by the other hand, not favoring the growth in your specific commodity. But here we see that fresh onions went to that third place, and even though it still had strong sales, it seems like fresh broccoli had some good momentum in this last month. Now we can look at the next report I have is the commodity subcategory. So this is one report that I absolutely love because it's very useful to compare the performance of, competing, complementing, supplementing, substituting items. Like it gives you, in a nutshell, a place where you can compare all those key POS metrics that I was referring to before. So I use the mangoes as the example because they're now all the craze. We know that mango sales have been on fire this year, and we see that retailers are bringing them closer to the consumer. They're doing this by heavy promotion, but they're using celebrations like the new Lunar New Year that Jana was mentioning before. So all of this kind of has played into that perfect storm and that surge in demand. But if we wanted to see if that trend is accelerating, we could use the different time periods that we have here as the end filters. So we have 52, 26, 13, and 4. So if I go from right to left, we go from a mild 14.4%, and then a very, very positive 116% for the latest 4 weeks. But we also, we can also use, like I said, this as a benchmark. So I'm just going to go here and I'm going to put some of the more popular products that we're seeing. Let's do kiwis. No, I'm feeling dangerous today, so maybe I'll do pineapples too. So if we look at these products, they're very different products. They have different growth rates in terms of supply. They're very different. What do all these four have in common? They all have grown through consumer choice. And when I mean consumer choice is they're eating more of these. People are eating more of these. And there's several reasons for that, right? One, they're convenient and they're available too. Second reason is two, they're very versatile. So you can have them for breakfast, but you also can have them for a snack, right? But then three, and probably most important, they taste good, right? They're flavorful. They have good nutritional benefits. So with that, they serve like a little treat, but also can accompany a lot of meal occasions, right? I will also show you some individual trended view reports. Here you can also select specific commodities and see year by year and month by month performance. So I could go deeper, but in the spirit of respecting your time, I will recommend that you look at them during your downtime because I'd rather go into shopper engagement, which is one of my favorite subjects. So when we talk about shopper engagement, we have to be very conscious on who and how people shop for produce today. So we want to impact those changes that we want to see tomorrow. Therefore, Circana, within their panel metric solutions, has all this data available for you. So very similar to the top 10 POS data commodities, so to speak, we have shopper data. So continuing with my onion obsession, because I'm feeling a little, let's say, under the onion, no pun intended, I'm going to go ahead and use onions as our example here. So again, all the filters that I had described before, very dynamic, but I'm going to go to this first one because I think it's very important. So percentage HH buying or household buying, that's what HH stands for, or what it would be traditionally called penetration. This metric would basically tell you is what percentage of all households bought my product for a specific period of time. So if we look at here, we can see that onions is basically in 4 out of 5 households in the US. 83% of total US households purchased onions during the last 52 weeks. Now I'm going to go to the dollars per buyer. So dollars per buyer speaks, rather than the consumer engagement part, it speaks more about the consumption, right? How much are people spending? And this dollars per buyer tells you how many dollars has the average household spent on my product in total during this time period. So on average, we could say, hey, on average, households spend $32.12 on onions for the last 52 weeks. And then last but not less important, we have product trips per buyer. So product trips per buyer, again, more into the frequency of the purchase. We're talking about more the sales rate rather than the consumer engagement part. So on average, how many trips were made for my product among these buyers? So here we can see that actually onions is one of the commodities that's only second to tomatoes, bringing a lot of frequency into the store. That makes a lot of sense to what was to the point I was making. Retailers are using this to get people through the door. And because I like things visual, and the people that built this terrific dashboard have a lot of graphics and visual in mind, I'm going to show you this wonderful sales decomposition visual that is set for the last 52 weeks, where you can toggle through the different commodities using the filter at the top left. So why is this beautiful, and why do I love it so much? This helps us understand the drivers of sales versus a year ago. So it basically decomposes those dollars into the different consumer components. It gives you the household buying piece, but it also gives you what the buying rate is. So to the left, you can see penetration is further broken down into one-time only buyers versus the repeat buyers. So what makes this important is it makes sense to ask the question, which group makes up the larger portion of our buyer base? Is it the new triers, or is it the repeat buyers, right? Then to the right, we have the trip frequency. And this trip frequency basically comes to explain, along with that dollar spent per trip, our buying rate, right? So the trip frequency talks about how often, right? Whereas the dollar spent per trip tells you how much. And you can note that if you go down a little level, you can see that the dollars per trip decomposes further into prices per unit and units per trip. So with these two aspects, what you can do is you can gauge whether increases or decreases have been due to either price increases or people having more in their baskets. So if we take a look at the left of the graph, we can see that almost 9 out of 10 households don't buy mangoes. So what does that tell me? We need to engage more buyers and get them to try mangoes. It's not an established product, and it seems like when people buy them, they keep them, because that's why they're having repeat buyers. So again, very different to what we were seeing in onions in the graph before, where we say, hey, 84% of household buyer. There, the conversation and strategy is not, let's get more people to try onions, because most people do consume onions. It's more of like, how do we get them to incorporate that into their recipes? How do we get them to spend that extra dollar, spend that extra trip to buy that onion? So last but not least, of course, we did say we had a Floral dashboard. So I wanted to show you real quick. Very similar reporting. Commodities are separated between indoor and outdoor. And so here we see in real time how roses are the highest grossing commodity sales for indoor floral. And it makes sense because of the seasonality, right? But we also see that potted plants, giving that seasonality, are the commodity that's providing their growth in the last 4 weeks. So we know that roses have been number one floral pick-me-up, right? As we know that consumers are embracing that joy economy of joy, and just getting closer into things that bring them happiness. But that also makes sense when you price it right, and you have a good display or a good customer-facing shelf that makes it very accessible to them. So that's the end of the content I wanted to share to you today. So please remember that this is just a very small part of what we have to offer. So if you want more specifics on detailed data about your specific products, you want deep dives around channels, retailers, store level data, consumption, consumer behavior, you name it, any other data you can think of, we are here for you. So Rachel, I think they've had more than enough to chew. I'll give you the mic back.
Thank you so much, Carlos. And we'll have Rachel jump back on too. This is our Q&A portion, but I just want to double emphasize what Carlos said. This Circana and IFPA really throughout Circana, we have so much more data than just what's up there. Items, store week, sales tracking, down to the US individual household by item. So you will see that the reports have a link at the bottom if you want to learn more. So I know we got a couple questions, Rachel, but first I want to pause to give you a chance to react to some of what we talked about from an IFPA perspective.
Well, I think what's really interesting is what you were saying about eggs, right? What's going to be, you know, even if people are still buying the thing that is possibly scarce, what are they not seeing as much of, or what are they not as interested in? What are they willing to give up in order to maintain that? And I'm looking at in light of tariffs, in the next few months, the majority of our mangoes are coming from Mexican crops, right?
Mhm.
And as we see those prices inevitably rise, not that it's the most ubiquitously eaten thing, but that is where those products come, and they're from, and they're a fresh product. If people are still really committed to buying things that they're used to buying, and i.e. mangoes from Mexico in the next few months, what might they give up instead, right? Where's that push pull going to come from? And it's really an exciting opportunity to start really kind of digging into that with some of the analytics tools that you've been talking about.
Yeah, and it dovetails on the question, one of the questions that we got in the chat, which was around talking more about the fact that in produce throughout the year, the average trip only includes 3 items, right? And that's
Yes,
exactly
exactly.
what you're talking about there. Um, Go ahead.
No. I was going to say that. Yeah, exactly. I was going to bring that one up too. Can you talk a little bit more about that maybe as well? Why only three? Like what's limiting? Is it people just can't only fathom eating that many things in a given amount of time, or what are we looking at?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is a topic that we've talked about in each fresh department. And I think for produce and floral, it really produce, it is the most important piece. As Carlos just showed you, even just at that, what we call the category level, I mean, every single category, of course, then has segments and items and flavors and packages and different, every single category from fresh jicama all the way up to bananas. There are multiple options just within that category. And I think we have something like 65 of them in produce alone. And yet only 3 times are people buying different categories. Some of that is Quick Trip. In some ways, it's remarkable when someone's only in the store for a few items that we're getting 3 on average when Quick Trips are such a big part of our way of shopping.
Right.
But I do think the opportunity, given that we're one of the only departments that has side dish solutions, breakfast solutions, snack solutions. I mean, you think about a smoothie alone, it probably includes at least 5 produce ingredients, and we're only getting 3.
At
I
least,
honestly think it's the way we've historically merchandised and promoted. So I've started to see with the advent of digital couponing, some retailers, especially in the supermarket grocery industry, are offering spend $10, get $3 off produce. So it's
yeah.
incenting the consumer to spend $10 on produce cumulatively. But
Hmm.
historically, that's like the first time in 2 decades I've seen someone have an aggregated, you spend $10 on anything in produce. Typically, we're giving a discount on this. And then the work that I've been doing is the supplier then goes, okay, well, what didn't they buy? Right. And it's competitive. I think the opportunity is to incent more promotions, merchandising ideas that say, buy this, get that. I always think about produce these days as there's primary categories that are going to be in the basket, especially on those quick trips. It's the reason you went. And then there's all these other categories that could go along too that are getting left behind because we're just saying, buy this, don't buy that. That's my
Hmm.
thought, Rachel. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Like you're seeing, that I think that sounds like a great strategy to kind of, grow the pie instead of shifting the slices around. And man, I'd love to see more of that, especially as we, enter a period where we're going to be seeing a lot of fluctuation in how people are willing to pay for and different fruits and vegetables, what they're willing to spend the money on. I think that we're looking at this what's coming up kind of in some ways the same way we kind of went into COVID, right, where we're like, okay, there's going to be huge fluctuations. What are we going to see? But the dynamics here are a lot different, right? There's we don't nobody minds going to the store more often, right? We see that now. Whereas COVID, we were having fewer trips, bigger spends, but and so that's not going to impact the type of groceries in that way. But I think that we're all really anxious to see what's coming down the line.
And speaking of that, there is a summary in the download pack. I'll let you do that, but I just want to put the screen up for a minute. We have gotten a lot of questions in the chat. I just want to emphasize this. What Carlos went through is what IFPA has graciously licensed from Circana to make available as a member benefit. But it is literally the tippy tip of the iceberg. If you're looking at specific items, package types, specific market, specific down to you. I mean, we literally track item level data, whether it is a UPC or a PLU or even a GTIN now and a shared barcode. So I really want to thank Rachel and the IFPA partnership because they've made all of that available to you as a member benefit, but by no means is it probably enough to answer every question that you have. So just leaving the audience here with this today, and you'll see the same links at the bottom of each of the reports when you go in the future. Ultimately, reach out because the amount of detail is immense. But the benefit this industry has, frankly, over other industries that I work with, is the association wants you to start using and feeling it at that top line level. And then, yes, if you contact us through this partnership as new clients, we are offering an IFPA member discount if you are a new client to Circana. And the goal ultimately that we both share, both Rachel, Carlos, and I, but also IFPA and Circana, is now that we have all of this data available, how are we going to use it? And I think that's really the narrative you'll be hearing from us throughout the year, especially in light of the headwinds we're facing between egg prices, tariffs, and who knows what else by the next time we talk in May. So I want to go ahead and thank Rachel so much for being our valued partner from IFPA as our research partner here, and also Carlos for being an excellent analyst showcasing the reporting today. If you have additional questions for all of us or Circana or IFPA in general, please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much. Recording and download to come, and have a wonderful afternoon.